Hannibal before Rome, the fateful campaign at Zama. The Battle of Zama in 202 BCE was the decisive confrontation of the Second Punic War and marked the final chapter in the legendary rivalry between Hannibal Barca of Carthage and Rome. This battle would determine the fate of Carthage, Hannibal's legacy, and the future of Roman dominance in the Mediterranean. It was a showdown between two military geniuses, Hannibal and the Roman general Scipio Africanus, and it sealed the fate of the Punic Wars, forever changing the course of ancient history. Background: Hannibal's Italian campaign. Hannibal's military brilliance became evident when he famously crossed the Alps in 218 BCE, bringing war to the Italian peninsula. His daring march with an army that included war elephants shocked the Romans, and Hannibal quickly won several major victories over Roman forces, including the devastating defeat of the Roman legions at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. At Cannae, Hannibal's tactical brilliance allowed him to encircle and destroy a much larger Roman army, delivering one of the most decisive victories in military history. However, despite these successes, Hannibal's campaign in Italy ultimately failed to achieve its strategic objective, breaking the Roman Republic's resolve. Rome, under the leadership of Quintus Fabius Maximus and later Scipio Africanus, adopted a defensive strategy known as the Fabian strategy, which avoided direct confrontation with Hannibal while wearing down his forces over time. Without sufficient reinforcements from Carthage and unable to force Rome into a peace settlement, Hannibal found himself isolated in Italy, waging a war of attrition for over a decade. The Roman counteroffensive and Scipio's strategy. While Hannibal fought in Italy, Rome sought to weaken Carthage by targeting its holdings elsewhere, particularly in Spain. The young Roman general Scipio Africanus proved to be a brilliant commander, successfully capturing key Carthaginian cities in Spain, including Carthago Nova, modern-day Cartagena, and cutting off Hannibal's supply lines. These victories significantly undermined Carthage's war effort, forcing it into a defensive position. In 204 BCE, Scipio took the bold step of invading North Africa, bringing the war to Carthage's doorstep. His objective was clear. By threatening Carthage itself, he could force Hannibal to abandon his campaign in Italy and return home to defend his city. Scipio's invasion was a masterstroke of strategy, as it diverted Carthage's attention away from Italy and shifted the war's focus to Africa. Hannibal's return to Carthage. Facing the imminent threat posed by Scipio's invasion, Carthage recalled Hannibal from Italy in 203 BCE. This was a turning point in the war, as Hannibal had to leave behind his long campaign in Italy without having achieved his ultimate goal. When Hannibal returned to Africa, he found Carthage in a desperate position. The once mighty Carthaginian Empire had been weakened by years of warfare, and Hannibal now faced the daunting task of defending his homeland against a rejuvenated and determined Roman army. Hannibal immediately began to reorganize Carthaginian forces. He assembled an army that included veterans from his Italian campaign, newly recruited soldiers, and mercenaries from Numidia. However, Hannibal's forces were not as well-equipped or well-trained as they had been in his earlier campaigns, and many of his troops lacked the experience and cohesion of his seasoned veterans. The Battle of Zama, 202 BCE. The Battle of Zama took place on the plains near Carthage in 202 BCE. It was here that Hannibal and Scipio met in a final showdown, both aware that the outcome of this battle would decide the fate of Carthage and the future of the Mediterranean. Hannibal's strategy. Hannibal, ever the master tactician, knew that he was at a disadvantage. His forces were outnumbered, and his reliance on mercenaries and inexperienced recruits weakened his army's overall effectiveness. However, Hannibal still possessed his tactical brilliance and hoped to use his war elephants to break through the Roman lines and cause chaos among Scipio's troops. Use of elephants. Hannibal deployed his war elephants at the front of his army, intending to unleash them on the Roman legions and scatter their ranks. Behind the elephants, he positioned his infantry in 3 lines, with his most experienced veterans in the rear and the less experienced troops in the front. Flanking maneuvers. Hannibal planned to use his cavalry on the flanks to outmaneuver and encircle the Roman forces once the elephants had disrupted their formation. He hoped to replicate the encirclement tactic he had used so successfully at Cannae. Scipio's strategy. Scipio, however, had studied Hannibal's tactics carefully and was well prepared for the battle. He understood the threat posed by Hannibal's elephants and devised a clever counter-strategy to neutralize them. Countering the elephants, Scipio arranged his legions in an open formation with wide lanes between the units. As the elephants charged, the Roman soldiers would step aside, allowing the elephants to pass harmlessly through the gaps in their ranks. Roman skirmishers and cavalry were then tasked with attacking the elephants from the sides, causing confusion among the animals and rendering them ineffective. Numidian cavalry. Scipio had also secured the support of King Massinissa of Numidia, whose cavalry had defected from Carthage to Rome. The Numidian cavalry played a crucial role in the battle, providing Scipio with a decisive advantage in mobility and helping to counter Hannibal's own cavalry forces. The course of the battle. The battle began with Hannibal's elephants charging toward the Roman lines, but Scipio's strategy worked perfectly. The elephants were funneled harmlessly through the Roman ranks, and many of them were either killed or driven off the battlefield. With the elephants neutralized, the battle shifted to the infantry. Hannibal's first two lines of infantry, composed of inexperienced troops and mercenaries, engaged the Roman legions but were quickly overwhelmed. As the Roman forces advanced, they faced Hannibal's veteran troops, who put up a fierce resistance. The fighting was intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. However, the turning point came when the Numidian cavalry under Massinissa routed Hannibal's cavalry on the flanks. With the Carthaginian cavalry defeated, the Numidian and Roman cavalry returned to the battlefield and attacked Hannibal's infantry from the rear, completing the encirclement of his forces. This tactic was eerily reminiscent of Hannibal's own maneuver at Cannae, but this time it was Hannibal who found his troops trapped and surrounded. Outcome of the battle. The Battle of Zama ended in a decisive victory for Rome. Hannibal's army was utterly defeated, with many of his soldiers killed or captured. Hannibal himself managed to escape the battlefield but knew that Carthage was now at Rome's mercy. The defeat at Zama forced Carthage to sue for peace. The terms of the peace treaty were harsh. Carthage was required to cede all of its overseas territories, including Spain, to Rome, pay a massive indemnity, and disband much of its military, including its navy. Carthage, once a mighty Mediterranean power, was reduced to a second-rate city-state, reliant on Rome for its survival. Aftermath and legacy. The Battle of Zama marked the end of the Second Punic War and the rise of Rome as the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. Hannibal's defeat at Zama sealed the fate of Carthage, but it did not diminish his reputation as one of the greatest military commanders in history. His daring campaigns and brilliant tactics, particularly his victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, ensured that his name would be remembered and studied by military strategists for centuries to come. For Scipio Africanus, Zama was the crowning achievement of his military career, earning him the title Africanus, in honor of his victory over Carthage. Scipio's victory at Zama cemented his status as one of Rome's greatest generals and established Rome as the dominant power in the Mediterranean world. Conclusion. The Battle of Zama was a fateful and decisive event that ended one of the most significant conflicts of the ancient world. Hannibal, despite his extraordinary abilities and tactical brilliance, was ultimately unable to overcome the strategic advantages and resilience of Rome. The defeat at Zama not only marked the end of Carthage's status as a major power, but also paved the way for the expansion of the Roman Republic into an empire that would shape the course of Western civilization for centuries to come. After the Punic Wars, Carthage was economically devastated and politically weakened by the harsh terms of the peace treaty imposed by Rome. In the wake of this disaster, Hannibal sought to rebuild his homeland, not through military means, but through political reform. Reforming Carthage's government. Hannibal's first priority upon his return to Carthage was the reform of the city's governance. He was elected to the position of Suffete, chief magistrate, and worked to reduce corruption and restore Carthage's financial stability. His reforms were aimed at weakening the power of the corrupt oligarchic elite who had mismanaged Carthage's resources and hindered the war effort against Rome. Economic reforms. Hannibal's economic policies included reducing the excessive taxes on the lower classes and implementing reforms that improved the city's revenues. These policies helped Carthage begin to recover from the devastation of the war, allowing the city to rebuild its economy and gradually pay off the massive war indemnity owed to Rome. 2. Roman pressure and Hannibal's exile. Hannibal's growing influence in Carthage alarmed many within the Roman Senate, who feared that the great general might once again rally Carthage or its allies against Rome. Roman politicians, particularly those with memories of the Second Punic War, were deeply suspicious of Hannibal's intentions, despite the fact that he was now focused on reform rather than military action. Demand for Hannibal's exile. In 195 BCE, a faction within the Roman Senate led by Cato the Elder pressured Carthage to remove Hannibal from power after the Punic Wars. Carthage was economically